Hello, my name's George Nash. I'm an archaeologist working largely with rock art and in particular in Western Britain. And today I'm going to be talking about a site called Trellyffaint, which is a Neolithic chamber tomb located in North Pembrokeshire. What draws me to this site is that I'm a specialist in rock art, and surprise, surprise, on the capstone, the stone you see in front of you, between the two large uprights has around about 75 cut marks on it. So that was my attraction initially to look at this particular site. The site forms an assemblage of around about 130 extant monuments, but I would probably suggest there was probably double that being in use during the Neolithic. This is just during a period of between 2000 and 4000 BC. And the site itself forms quite an interesting sort of cluster of monuments around an enclosed valley called the Nevern Valley. The main village there's a place called Newport. But on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you can just see the red dots, which indicate the monuments that have rock art, and the black dots, which are chamber tombs. So there's quite a cluster of monuments located around this particular site. The landscape aspect of the site is, again, probably another lecture because it's such a complex landscape to be looking at. The site is not quite close enough to the sea to see the sea, so there's no intervisibility. But if you were to stand on the capstone and tiptoe up, you could just about see Cardigan Bay to the north. To the east of the site, there's another chamber tomb called Lechydribid. And just to the south of this particular site, is a site called Trellyffaint, which I actually excavated in between 2010 and 2012. So again, it's an area rich in Neolithic history. In terms of the historic mapping, the site is mentioned on a lot of the late 19th century, early 20th century mapping, as you can see there, mentioned in different forms, but at least it's marked. And also the Royal Commission have undertaken a number of aerial photographs over the last 40 to 50 years, which indicate, again, its place within the landscape. Now, my interest into this site, because of its rock art aspect, started about 15, 20 years ago when I was working with a Korean TV team, yes, Korean, and they were interested in filming cut marks around the world. So this was a prime site to look at. And I started to think about the idea of maybe investigating the site just as a non-intrusive project first, just look at the geophysics, look at the earthwork survey, because it had been looked at previously, but not in any great detail. So really, 20 years ago is when I really started to get interested in looking at this particular site. What we have today is what I would call a confused pile of stones. Although if you look at the stones very, very carefully, you can see the arrangement of a chamber with a capstone. And more importantly, this is where it gets quite interesting. This is that the Trellyffaint site has an additional chamber or an additional entrance into the chamber itself. This is what it looks like from the air. And again, this is a Royal Commission image. Taken, I think, around about 1965. But again, it just shows you the extent of the agricultural practices running up against the monument. So you can see, if I just go back one, how there's been quite a few problems dealing with the idea of the survival of the mound, for example. The mound is really non-existent, although as an experienced archaeologist, many of you will see that there are slim traces of that mound showing through as an earthwork. So in year one, the first thing we started to think about was the idea of doing some initial geophysical survey, again, non-intrusive. And from this, we obviously seek permission from the landowner and CADU, and also informed the local archaeological trust as well. We also did an earthwork survey as well, just to see what was surviving. Really, it's very easy to look at the monument with a fresh pair of eyes, but again, just to put in the detail of the in situ stones, for example, and that did help us to work out the extent of the survival of the mound. We also did a lot of GPS work on this. We obviously wanted to map it properly, so we mapped not just the site itself, but we mapped a lot of the landscape. And just again, put you in the picture, it's on a very slight north-south slope. The north being to the right of your picture, the south being to the left. And to the left of the picture, about 200 meters away, there's a standing stone called the Trellyffaint standing stone. And I would probably suggest that both monuments are contemporary and were in use at the same time. So that's the site. We did, like I say, as you said, we did an earthwork survey on the site, and also we also actually traced, I think for the first time properly, the cut marks on the stone. And there is our second chamber or entrance or something, some sort of feature, which stands just away from the main chamber. From the air, you can just see the capstone and the three major uprights that hold the capstone up. The capstone is around about 25 to 30 tons in weight, so it's quite a sizable piece of rock. And as you can see, that the capstone has been slightly dislodged. It's come away from the uprights. Now, as far as I'm aware, there's been no previous excavations or any previous antiquarian investigations into this site, although I dare say at some point within its recent history of the last 200 to 300 years, someone may have gone in there and started digging away at the chamber just to see if there were any goodies in there. And this was a common practice on Welsh chamber monuments during this period, during the 18th and 19th and early 20th centuries. So we had at our disposal a number of methods to record this monument. We did some aerial photography, of course, and we also did some nighttime photography. Remember, I was there initially just to look at the rock art, and again, we went there in the middle of the night and used oblique lighting to highlight the cut marks on the capstone. And as you can see with the scale right at the bottom of the picture, that's a half-meter scale. It's quite a sizable chunk of rock, as I said earlier on. And as I also said that we've got around about 75 cut marks on there. So as you can see here, where I've sort of blotted out the cut marks in red, just to give you some idea about the distribution. And again, since these cut marks have been made, we've really lost what they actually mean. I tend to think that because they are on the top of a capstone looking up into the skyline, we could be looking at star constellations there. And this is something which I postulated for the nearby Trellyffaint monument, which I excavated, as I said, about 10, 15 years ago. So that's the top of the capstone. This was the prime reason why we decided to do a project at Trellyffaint, because of that rock art. It hadn't been looked at before previously. Well, it had been, but not in the detail that we were looking at it. And then we set about by doing an earthwork survey, and that entailed a lot of digital know-how from my colleagues. But we came up with this plan of the site, and we did manage to sort of tease in or find the remnants of a mound. It's more than likely that when the site was in use, it would have been approached from the east, and the back of the chamber would be at the western end. This is something which is quite common in portal dolmen type sites like this. And also, more importantly, it would have been enclosed in some form of kidney-shaped mound. It's something which I actually found when I excavated Trellyffaint. So we do have there, although I can't prove it unless we were to excavate around it, but we do have the possibility of a kidney-shaped mound on this particular site. But nonetheless, we did find that. We also found quite a lot of in situ stones, which I've marked with an X, which suggests that there is probably, underneath that very, very thin veneer of soil, quite a sizable and well-defined monument waiting to be discovered. This is our eventual plan, which you see on the right-hand side, and we compared it with what Christopher Barker was doing in 1992 with his very, very good survey of Pembrokeshire monuments. Again, he was there basically just to record the outline of the major stones of each monument. And believe it or not, there are around about 50 of these monuments within this area. This makes it one of the highest concentrations of Neolithic chamber tombs within, certainly within Western Britain. And what you see on the right-hand side is our plan with the mound incorporated. So that's really the most up-to-date plan we have. And again, just detailed scrutiny of that chamber showed that there was a dislodged capstone, which I think may be moved more, which has moved really from the right of the top of those uprights, and it slid backwards towards the left. We also did some photogrammetric imagery, which was very useful for producing a 365-degree view of the monument, which we could actually animate, which we did. These are just stills from that particular bit of the project. And then in year 2, we then decided to do some serious geophysical survey, just to see if we could think about the idea of doing some sort of targeted investigations. And again, all non-intrusive. We're using 2 colleagues of mine from Bristol University who are sort of into geophysics. We got a team of people up to come and give us a hand to do this geophysics. The oldest being Pam, who was in her late 80s at the time when she did this. And we started to do the geophysical survey around the monument. We were doing 20-meter quadrants. We did 4 of those around the monument, so a total of 80 square meters. And then we did extend that those quadrants further to the north, just to see what the actual ritual landscape was like. Now, the reason why we were doing this, quite simply, is because when we were doing the Trellyffaint monument a few years previously, we concentrated on the standing stone, which was a standing stone, but we then proved it was actually a chamber monument. We realized that within quite a large area, there was a massive amount of archaeology going on, which was just below the soil line of the field. So although we couldn't see it as an earthwork, those features were certainly there. And what we noticed was that Trellyffaint, which is again about 2 kilometers to the southwest of this particular monument, we found around about 9, the evidence through the geophysical survey, evidence of around about 9 barrows. So just gives you an idea about how complex these Neolithic stroke Bronze Age landscapes can be. So we started to do the geophysical survey, and this is what we came up with. The blue blob you see in the middle of your picture is the actual monument itself. And then just to the bottom right, you can just see the remnants of maybe 3 circles. And that was our sort of, I suppose, our target, really. We decided to target one of those circles. So it was around about 10 to 15 meters away from the monument, just to see what was there. Was it a stone standing, or was it a stone circle? Was it a circle setting? Was it a henge? So we were interested in that, and we also extended the geophysical survey again just to see what we got in terms of a much wider landscape. And although the circles from the first picture I showed you, which is there, had not so much disappeared, but had been absorbed into the greyness of the geophysical survey, other things were coming up. And you can just see that there's a track at the bottom of your picture, amongst other things as well. And do just take into consideration that the big problem we had with this particular site, as we do with many, many sites, is barbed wire, buried barbed wire, or buried plowshares, or buried ferrous material, which does give a bit of a problem when you're trying to do a clean geophysical survey. But nonetheless, from that particular geophysical survey image, we targeted 2 small trenches, and I'll come to those in a minute, around the inner circle of the monument, which of the Trellyffaint landscape area. It was within the schedule area, so we had to apply for schedule monument consent to do any excavation there, and that was given to us duly, I think, in 2017. So in 2018, 2019, we started to think about the process of doing the excavation, and they were just small keyhole trenches, and they were hit and miss. If we found anything, fantastic. If we didn't, well, it didn't matter, because remember, the rationale for me being there in the first place was to look at the rock art. But what did come out of those trenches was something quite spectacular. So that's the geophysical team. After year 2, we then sort of started thinking about the landscape. And I just wanted to put these 2 pictures in first, just to show you what we look at in terms of landscape. The standing stone you see on the left-hand side is the Trellyffaint standing stone, and right above that on the horizon is the Trellyffaint monument. And then just to put that into contrast or into context, this is the so-called standing stone, which Grimes, W.F. Grimes, the famous Welsh archaeologist of the mid-20th century, had identified as a potential capstone, and I agree with him on that one. This is the site at Trellyffaint, which I excavated a few years previously, and it had a very similar landscape to the Trellyffaint monument, because there was actually a standing stone associated with this particular stone as well, which actually turned out to be a Neolithic Portal Dolmen monument. So there's our targeted trenching area, which is in the white band, as you can see. So back to start the final year of our project, which was to do this exploratory 2-trench excavation. Not very big, but as you can see there, the typical of sort of rural archaeology, the stratigraphy is very, very shallow indeed. We went down around about 40 centimeters, and then we started to hit really the Neolithic land surfaces, and we obviously came across the indicative flints that you would find from these sort of sites, and there's some very nice flint there as well, some very nice diagnostics. So 2 trenches side by side with each other, and they basically followed one of the sections of the curvature of this potential. I think it was probably a henge or a hingey form, and very ephemeral in terms of its archaeology, but very, very visible within the geophysics. So what did we come across? Well, the first thing we came across around about 20 to 30 centimeters below the ground surface was plough lines. So obviously the site had been ploughed quite recently, in fact. Although I did speak to the farmer who's been there for 11 years, he'd never ploughed it, but he did remind me that people previously had actually ploughed the site. We got to work. We've got a good team of people working through. Most of them were actually Welsh, but we did actually have an international flavour as well. We had 2 Americans who decided to come along and get involved. One of them is a very good friend of mine who works with prehistoric archaeology in New York State, but he came over with his friend. Between us and the team, we worked in the most miserable weather you can imagine, typical of Southwest Wales, of course. But didn't deter our spirits. And as you can see there, around about 40 centimeters below the plough line, we start to encounter stone features. And again, the first thing you do as a prehistoric archaeologist, you leave those in situ and just see what's going on as you bring yourself down layer by layer. And when I say layer by layer, there are only about 3 or 4 layers that you actually went across, which actually extend into all sections of the trench. So this is our first feature. Again, just see the coloration of the soil, suggesting it's a circular feature within the first trench. This is the squared trench. And what I did was to initially half sections the feature, and then realized, because its fragility and because of what we found in it, I decided to excavate the whole feature. And also I kept all the stones as well, because obviously if the stones inside this feature, which is a shallow pit, may have had some significance. So I've kept those, and they are now with the National Museum of Wales. And that's the other feature 2, which we excavated, but we could only excavate so far because within my project design, I informed Cadw that I wasn't going to go below a certain depth. So that is waiting to be excavated. It is, again, a very interesting feature. The stones appear to be deliberately sort of layer upon against each other, forming a circular feature, probably some sort of pit of some kind. We sampled the soil inside and outside. Nothing was revealing, although I have kept the soil samples back for pollen analysis. This is something which I'll probably take on at some point when I've got some spare time to look at this, to relook at this particular site in some more detail. So that's the pit fully excavated, and revealed excavated outside that, out of that shallow pit, were around about 36 pieces of pottery, which form a whole pot. a grooved ware pot, which is of Neolithic date, and a few pieces of flint. But the pottery is very, very exciting indeed. And I'll come to that a little bit in a minute. It's my piece de resistance for this particular lecture. And this is the pottery we found. This is it's obviously decorated. There is a little bit of controversy about if it's grooved well or not. I think it is. I got a couple of my colleagues who are specialists in prehistoric pottery, prehistoric wash pottery, and they confirmed it to be grooved well. And what I did was I told the excavator, my colleague who's an American archaeologist, not to take away any of the residues or soils away from the pottery. So we excavated the pottery pieces in their entirety with the encrusted soil around them. The reason being is that they could be excavated in the laboratory and studied for residue analysis. So my colleagues at Bristol University in the Department of Chemistry got hold of this pottery. They got hold of actually 6 sherds of pottery of this size that you can see in front of you. And what you see there is the external surfaces of the pottery, but inside were clear encrusted residues which could be extracted. And we extracted the lipids from the residues. And what we were very fortunate about, at the time of sending these pieces of pottery into the Department of Chemistry, just for residue analysis, just to tell us what the residues were. In fact, they were actually cheese or yogurt. But also they had just pioneered a new revolutionary dating method to date lipids. And what you see on the left-hand side here is the dating of those lipids, and the dating of the lipids is perfect for me. It's within 3100 BC, the date of that pottery. That's when that pottery was deposited in this particular henge or hengiform site. So it just gives us an idea, a handle on what we're looking at in terms of the pottery. So the pottery date with the flint date to around about 3000 BC. And there is, again, my 2 American colleagues holding some of the flint. And the finds, again, from the two trenches were, for the size of the trench, quite spectacular in my view. The pottery and the flint obviously made the story for us. And like all good archaeologists, we managed to re-turf the site, put the site back as it was. Went back there a year later. You see in the top right-hand corner, one of my colleagues is standing there proud, showing that the actual site had been completely retaken back by the grasses within the field, and you wouldn't even know we'd been there. So that's the excavation site. And I suppose the thing I would finish off with this particular project, yes, the finds were spectacular, but more importantly, the camaraderie and I suppose the journey from the initial survey or the initial investigations we did on the site, the non-intrusive investigations, to the 2 small trenches we excavated, were great fun despite the weather. Okay, well, thank you very much for listening, and I dare say I'll take any questions that come my way